Hello. I'm always sad at this point in the course. I hate saying goodbye, despite the fact that we only get to spend a certain amount of time with one another. I still find it teaching to be very intimate, and so I like working with you, and I hope you've enjoyed learning from me, and perhaps I will get to cross your paths in the future. Until then, today, for today's lecture, that is, I'm just going to talk off the cuff, as it were, no slides. Just me as a philosopher talking to folks who are learning about philosophy for the first time, perhaps. So, we've covered a lot of stuff, lots of discussion of free will and knowledge and God and some perennial philosophical questions. There, there is, there is one topic I'd like to leave on, and it's, I think, identified most clearly in a very old text, a dialogue written by Plato called the Symposium. Now, the Symposium is on the nature of love. Like, what is love? Like, that's the target, that's the goal of the analysis of this dialogue. But in getting there, I think some very interesting problems that plague philosophy and philosophical inquiry arise. And this is going to be some sophisticated stuff, so I'll walk through it a little slowly, but I think the lessons learned from this conversation, or this discussion, this lecture that is, might be valuable for you more generally as philosophy lived in life rather than analyzed through arguments as we've been doing. So let me tell you a bit about the Symposium. So Plato is writing about this drinking festivity. That's what a symposium is. That's where it was back in Greece at the time. People would get around and they would talk about some topic. They would pass around an amphora full of wine and they would just guzzle and start giving speeches and stuff. And that's what's happened here. Agathon is this poet who writes about the good and love, and he's won this poetry competition with a poem about love, and they're all celebrating. And Socrates is there. Socrates is, the famed philosopher, the one that Plato writes about, the one that many Greeks wrote about. The Platonic dialogues were not just a style that Plato invented. A lot of other Greeks wrote Socratic dialogues too. So Socrates was very famous in his day. Socrates was known to go around and argue with sophists, or people who show the weaker argument to be the stronger and teach you how to manipulate people. And he would go around seeking truth and trying to dispute these people and undermine their fallacies and show you how to think clearly and think virtuously, he thought. And so this is why he was so admired by philosophers at the time and other thinkers. Socrates, if you know anything about the history, he was eventually sentenced to death by the Athenians for corrupting the youths. He was giving them, false impressions of gods and false impressions of virtue, and so he was disruptive and dangerous. What a renegade! And he was, in fact, a renegade. Now, here at this point, we're getting an understanding of Socrates through Plato's eyes. Plato was his student. Plato thought very highly of him, and so in this dialogue, we have almost the culmination of it being Socrates discussing what he thinks the nature of love is. And this is in passing. So Agathon, the poet, he gives his characterization of love. It's missing some things. Some other people point out what it's missing. Agathon's, I think, is just focused on love of perfection or something, and somebody else comes in and says, no, to have love you need a gap, you need something missing, so you need to add that to the analysis. And they do this until we get to Socrates, who is the last. And Socrates gives a very riveting, very compelling presentation of what he thinks love is. Now, it's not his own view. Socrates is giving this, he is the mouthpiece for a priestess, he says, named Diotima. And this view that he's presenting, which he thinks is true, is Diotima's. And the view is, simply put, that love is only meaningful insofar as it either is or is concerned with what is universal and objective. So it is recognition that we are falling short of that objectivity. It's recognition we are falling short of the universality because we're limited humans. But it is our goal. Love is this goal, this form, the perfection. It's off there. So Agathon kind of got it right, but we're not there. And our love is just a reflection of that pure love of the universal and objective truth that is reality. So that's that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, it doesn't really. I mean, Socrates is kind of going up in a balloon here. It's one of the reasons why I think Plato put Socrates telling this tale through the mouth of through somebody else's lens, because it's hard to really make sense of this. That's not the point, though. That's not the point of why I'm talking about it here. The point of why I'm talking about it here is what happens after Socrates' speech, and this is where I think the real trouble, something really troubling about philosophy emerges. So, right after Socrates gives his speech, Alcibiades comes in. Alcibiades was a real person. He was a noble young man in Greek society. He was well-to-do. He was very famous. Everybody loved him. I mean, they loved him in Greece, or in Athens specifically. Really Greece. Like, the guy was like one of the first celebrities. Let me say, I'll just tell you one story. Like, during the Peloponnesian War, this is a war between Athens and Sparta. The Athenians are not doing well, but they're like warring with each other. Sparta's a baller. They have a great military. Athenians have a great navy, but they're struggling. At some point during this war, Alcibiades, who is Athenian, switches sides, joins the Spartans. Okay? And then he served with them for several years, fighting against the Athenians. And then, here's the kicker. A couple of years later, he went back to the Athenians, who welcomed him with open arms. Think about that for a second. He betrayed the Athenians, got a lot of their people kidnapped too, or like held as prisoners of war. He then worked with the Spartans against the Athenians until he was ready to turn around. And he turned back around and said, "Hey, I want to join the Athenians again." And they just said, "Yeah, come on in, buddy." The guy was universally loved. He was again a celebrity, right? Like, people just wanted him around. So he also was living at the time when Socrates was writing. I mean, he was one of the Athenian noble folks that Socrates was he was accused of corrupting. Like the young men, he was accused of corrupting people like Alcibiades. I'm sorry, I get lost thinking about how crazy a life Alcibiades had. Anyway, so Socrates considered Alcibiades to be a brilliant student, and one of the students that he needed to focus his attention on to improve their virtuous character. But he seemed to fall short. Socrates seemed to, in many ways, fail Alcibiades. He would teach him the ways of virtue, but then Alcibiades would go back to Athens and do terrible things. And Plato knew this. Plato was writing about it. Alcibiades, in this symposium, at the end of this dialogue, he bursts in the door after Socrates has finished speaking. And he's drunk already. So before he even gets to the drinking party, he's drunk. That's how, by the way, in the dialogue, if you haven't read it, it's hilarious. He kicks the door and it says, "Gentlemen, I'm drunk." Like, that's just a great way to enter. So he then takes a seat between Socrates and Agathon, which incidentally, Agathon in Greek, or Agathos, means good, the good in Greek. So he sits between Socrates and the good. And here's what he says, and I'll paraphrase it. He says, "You guys want to know what love is? I will tell you. I'll tell you what love is. I love Socrates. I love this man. He tells me my beliefs are wrong. He shows me that they must be, and I believe him. But then I return to my life, and I find old beliefs and vices that are exalted by the Athenians, and I'm weak. I fall into pride of my skills, supported on nearly every side by my vices. But I know better, because the man I love showed me better. The weight of the world is too much, though. Despite what I know, I crawl back to my love, weeping, in need, but he's gone, distant, off in contemplation, far away from me. I try to wait for him. Where can I go, though? Back to Athens? They praise vice. To virtue alongside my love, he won't show me the way. I can only wait alone, knowing that virtue exists, but only able to live in vice. I know my love abandons me when I need him most. Socrates speaks of love as objective and universal. If he's right, then witness love before you. I am love, and love is torture." That's his speech. Alcibiades has been shown the truth. But convincing a vicious person to be virtuous without showing him how is torture. And Socrates failed to show Alcibiades how to be virtuous. And so he failed him as a teacher. And this is what I think Plato is identifying. Alcibiades is not just any student. Alcibiades is important. He's an important political figure. He has charisma, influence, he's persuasive. He is just as capable of preaching vice as he is virtue. Socrates spends his time with small potatoes arguing against sophists who convince people of this or that, but they don't have political influence. Alcibiades does. And he's the real hard case. Arguing against sophists is small potatoes. Arguing or convincing Alcibiades to be good, that's everything. And Socrates fails to do that. And that's where this dialogue ends. What is love? It says. Well, the ending is it's either universal or objective, or at least it's meaningful insofar as it is, or it's torture. And if you're falling short of the objectivity and the universality that Socrates is saying we all do, then where are you? Well, you're with Alcibiades in vice and torture. And that's what the practicality of love is. Here's the thing. We philosophers, we like to think in analytic terms, and we like to identify conceptually good arguments or good concepts and be clear about our thinking. We like to aim at virtue, but we don't really spend a lot of time thinking about how to be virtuous or thinking about how to teach virtue. We leave that up to other institutions. But what good is it? There's the perennial problem. What good is it teaching you, pointing to what virtue is, whether it be argumentative or ethical or whatever, just to let you fall into vice and be tortured by your knowledge? I'm not sure that's... I'm not sure how... What should I say? That's troubling, right? That's troubling. So what I don't want to do here is I don't want to end this class by just pointing to virtue, or whether pointing to the good, or pointing to good conceptual analysis as a toolkit and letting you fall short if you don't want to fall short. I don't want you to be tortured by your knowledge, okay? So let me say this. I know this was all online, so we didn't really get the chance to interact with one another that much, but I'm going to be here for a while. I'm going to be at the university for a while. If you want to know, if you want to learn, if you want to know how to be virtuous, how to live virtuously, how to point to the virtue and aim towards it without being tortured the way that Socrates allowed his prize students to be, then tell me. Come. Reach out. Email me. Whatever. Morality, philosophy, it's a lifelong endeavor. You don't have to major in it to get the benefits. I can point you in the right directions. I can link you up with people who can help. I can point you to resources. Just stay in touch, stay in contact, and don't be tortured, because you don't have to be. You could learn these skills, and I can help guide you if you like, and I'm happy to do so. And from here on, I'll be teaching in person, so we could do it in class together if you're interested. So in that, let me just close then on this troubling problem that is very challenging to solve. And then my offer, the problem again, just to summarize, as I like to do, pointing to virtue is one thing, teaching to be virtuous is another. And without both, students are tortured by their ignorance, tortured by their knowledge. I can help you, and I'm happy to help you bridge that gap between practice and knowledge. If you're interested, just let me know. And with that, I think the only thing I have left to say is thank you. I appreciate all the time and effort you put into this class. I know many of you put a lot of effort in it. I definitely saw that. I was very pleased often when I was reading the discussion boards and reading in the emails that were sent asking for clarificatory questions. Now, I know the quizzes were challenging. They were supposed to be, but don't worry, there's a curve. I ask harder than normal questions on purpose so that you think harder about the material than you would otherwise. So I've empirically tested this, so I know it can be tough and feels like a struggle, but you did improve, as everybody does. The class average is improved. You did very well. You did exactly as I expected, and I applaud you for that. This was a hard class, and you did well. So thank you for that, and until later.